The shot was clean. Perfect, even. A single trigger pull from 742 yards out, just before sunrise. The figure on the rooftop, confirmed HVT, suspected insurgent coordinator, stood silhouetted against the first gold light of morning, unaware, still, and exposed. Staff Sergeant Kyle Maddox had been waiting 6 days for this exact moment. Buried in rubble, breathing through gauze, motionless under camouflage netting layered with trash and gravel. He'd tracked the man's movement pattern through informants and aerial hints. He had studied the rooftop, predicted the timing, calculated the trajectory. Wind 0, humidity low, no obstructions. He exhaled and fired. The round left the barrel and traveled like lightning. It struck center mass. The target crumpled with immediate finality. Maddox blinked once, lowered the scope slightly, waiting for the ripple effect. Panic, scatter, calls for help, movement. But none came. The city remained quiet. Too quiet. And then, something he couldn't explain. A mirror flashed from the adjacent rooftop. Another from the north window. Then another. Angled reflections. Deliberate. Synchronized. That's when he knew. It wasn't a kill. It was a trigger. He had activated something. His radio clicked once. Static. Then silence. The frequency was jammed. Not broken. Not accidental. He adjusted bands. Cycled through failsafes. Nothing. Then movement began. Measured, fast, coordinated. Fighters emerged from buildings in all directions. Not sprinting, not scrambling. Moving like they knew exactly where he was. Not toward the body, toward his position. The realization hit hard. The target was bait. Every rooftop he had surveyed was false security. Every alley had eyes. His presence had been anticipated. The shot wasn't the end. It was the start. The city had shifted from silence to ambush in seconds, and Maddox was in the center. He wasn't the hunter anymore. He was the hunted, and the trap had just been sprung. The city was quiet in the way only war-torn cities know how to be. Haunted, hollow, heavy. The wind dragged through the alleyways like breath through fractured lungs, carrying with it the dry taste of dust, fuel, and the memory of fire. From his position on the third floor of a crumbling apartment block, Staff Sergeant Kyle Maddox lay still, his body flat against a floor that reeked of mildew and cordite. Through a carefully crafted sniper's nest, 2 broken bricks stacked and wrapped in torn fabric, he had a direct line of sight on a rooftop across the plaza, 742 yards away. The structure was concrete, sun-bleached, pitted with bullet scars. The kind of roof insurgents used for quick comms, quick kills, or quick exits. For 6 days, he waited there. No movement except when necessary. No light except the thin glow of his optics. His rifle rested on a sandbag wrapped in rubber to keep it from slipping. His scope had been zeroed with the obsessive precision only a seasoned sniper understands. Every hour he logged changes in wind, ambient temperature, humidity, traffic noise, and the call patterns of local birds. He had tracked the same group of pigeons for 3 days, noting how they scattered to the same 3 rooftops and always avoided one. That one. The target roof. He didn't trust patterns in war, but when even the animals avoided a place, you paid attention. Command had given the mission a green light based on raw intel. An informant, some vague chatter, and drone footage that caught a lone figure pacing at dawn. The Architect, they called him. A nickname pulled from intercepted comms. A man supposedly behind 3 roadside bombings and a school bus massacre. No confirmed photo, no print. Just a location and a pattern. Maddox had doubts, but in his world, doubts were luxuries, and luxuries got people killed. He'd seen the enemy use this playbook before. Deliberate routine, faint visibility, intentional carelessness meant to bait. But this one felt different. The figure never looked up, never shifted quickly. Moved slow and alone. No visible security. Maddox considered that a trap too. The false sense of vulnerability. But 6 days of patience and radio silence began to chip away at that suspicion. Maybe this was real. Maybe this was the kill. And when it came, he needed to be ready. His spotter was 2 blocks east in an elevated school building, watching Maddox's flank and scanning for heat signatures. They hadn't spoken except in code over burst transmission. Their gear was kept minimal. Maddox carried his custom M40 rifle, suppressed, bolt action, chambered in 7.62 51mm, reliable, intimate. He could hear every click, feel every pound of pressure in the bolt, and sense wind shifts before they touched his cheek. Night after night, the skyline didn't change. The minarets loomed over the city like silent sentinels, their calls to prayer long since drowned by gunfire and drone engines. The streets were mostly empty during the day, but Maddox noted the slow reappearance of life. Vendors cautiously opening shutters, children running between burnt-out cars, women dragging buckets of water in silence. The neighborhood was preparing for something. Whether that something was peace or more violence was unclear. On the morning of the 7th day, the light changed. A thin gray broke into orange along the horizon. The streets were unusually quiet. Too early for movement. The birds had relocated entirely. No pigeons on the roof, no crows on the wire. Just the stillness of prelude. And then he saw him. A figure stepped onto the target roof. Same posture, same gait, wrapped in the same keffiyeh pattern he'd been watching. He moved to the edge of the roof, stood at the corner, and turned his back toward the sniper's building. He was alone. No radio chatter, no second man. He placed a small object near the ledge, a radio or a detonator. Maddox couldn't tell. This was the moment. Maddox's breath slowed. He locked his cheek to the stock, adjusting his focus with a single rotation of the dial. Crosshairs rested just below the sternum. Wind. 3 ma. Right to left. No sway. No shadows. A clean profile. He counted his breathing, not his heartbeats. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. Squeeze. But before the trigger broke, something cold pulled at his instinct. Something not seen, but felt. There was no reflection on the glass windows behind the target. No movement on the balconies. No laundry on the lines. No smoke from the stovepipes. No pigeons. No dogs barking. No voices in the market below. He knew war. Knew what absence meant. But the shot was already in motion. The decision already made. And war doesn't wait for certainty. He squeezed the trigger. The recoil was mild. The report barely a whisper. The target dropped. And the trap was sprung. The moment the body hit the rooftop, the silence deepened. It didn't break. It thickened. There was no scrambling of enemy forces, no screams, no rush to recover the fallen. Only stillness, dense and unnatural. It was the kind of silence that followed a decision already made. Maddox didn't lift his cheek from the stock. He kept the scope trained on the rooftop, tracking for secondary movement, scanning for spotters or shadows. Nothing. Not even a bird moved across the skyline. He adjusted slightly to widen his view, glancing across rooftops and windows. That's when he saw it. A glint. Not sunlight bouncing off glass. Controlled. Deliberate. A mirror signal, low and fast, flashing once, then twice, from the east-facing window of a building 400 meters off. Then another signal from the opposite direction. Another from the south. Maddox's stomach dropped. He'd seen it before. Training exercises, joint ops in Syria. Coordinated mirror flashes used to confirm line of sight and alignment. But here, it wasn't friendly. It was baited triangulation. He'd just lit himself up to 3 Overwatch teams that had been waiting for his muzzle flash. The shot wasn't the kill, it was the trigger. He was being hunted. Maddox rolled off the rifle, letting it rest on the sandbag, and crawled backward into the shell of the room behind him. He kept his movements controlled, shallow, arms tight to his sides, avoiding the disturbed powder and broken brick. His boot knocked over a spent casing and it rattled, echoing louder than it should have. He winced and froze. Listened. Then he heard it. Boots. Not far. Not close. Below. Multiple sets, pacing across the first floor, fanning out. His position had been compromised within seconds. That wasn't reaction time. That was preparation. His exact hide location had been predicted. Not spotted after the shot. Predicted before it. He pulled out the secondary optic, a small monocular, and peered through the crack in the rear wall. More movement. A figure in black tactical gear slipped into the alley behind his building. Not militia. Not loose robes and sandals. Tactical vests. Gloves. Trained gait. Maddox had seen contractors move like that. Special units. Quiet killers. He checked his sidearm. A suppressed SIG, chambered and ready. His main rifle would slow him down now. He disassembled it in 4 motions and packed it into the low-profile rig slung on his back. It was muscle memory. Hands working while his mind mapped escape routes. There were none that felt safe. The stairwell was covered. The back was compromised. Roof access might give elevation, but he'd be silhouetted and likely flanked. He checked his watch. 17 minutes had passed since the shot. He was already late for exfil check-in. His spotter would be trying to reach him now. He tapped his radio once. Static. Tried again. Nothing. Jammed. Full bandwidth interference, not just disruption. He took 1 deep breath and moved. Swift, low, breaking across the hallway to the far wall where a section of collapsed floor gave him access to the level below. He dropped silently, landing in debris, rolled into cover, and paused. Movement echoed from the stairwell above. Voices, distant, clipped. Not English. Not loud. They were communicating through hand signals. He could hear the subtle pressure of boots against gravel. Tight formations, staggered movement, corner clears. They weren't rushing. They were hurting. That's when he realized the depth of it. They knew he was there. Knew how he would react. The shot had opened the gate, and every move after was being anticipated. His instincts had kept him alive before, but now they were being used against him. They were funneling him. He abandoned the plan to hold and started planning for distance. He broke right, kicked open the side door of the lower floor, and sprinted through a narrow passage of collapsed walls. No time to be elegant. He vaulted a rusted pipe, ducked under an exposed beam, and burst into the alley beyond. Gunfire erupted from behind. Short, controlled bursts aimed to suppress, not kill. They wanted him alive. Maddox dove behind a burnt-out vehicle, rolled to the rear tire, and caught his breath. He had seconds. The nearest safe zone was 3 blocks west, an empty medical clinic used as a dead drop point. If he could make it there, he might find emergency bandages, a backup radio, maybe even a cache. He sprinted again, weaving through rubble, avoiding open doors. Bullets zipped overhead, cracking brick and shattering glass. A round struck the wall inches from his head, sending a plume of dust into his path. He didn't look back. He reached the clinic just as his lungs began to cramp. He slid into the stairwell and barricaded the door behind him with a rusted filing cabinet. Then he ascended the stairwell 2 at a time, reached the roof, and pulled his monocular again. From there, the city pulsed like a trap, alive and breathing. Fighters moved in cells of 3 to 5, sweeping in concentric rings. Rooftops that had been empty hours before were now command points. Laser rangefinders blinked from broken windows. The whole sector had changed. And at the center of it all was the rooftop he had fired on. But something was wrong. The body was still there. No one had moved it. No one had touched it. As if it was still needed. He looked closer. That's when he saw the wires, beneath the corpse, coiled around the neck, strung to a power box near the stairwell hatch. It was a dummy. No blood. No mass. A mannequin dressed in layers, designed to take a sniper round and fall convincingly. From the muzzle flash alone, they had tracked him. And now they were sweeping outward. He sat back in the darkness of the rooftop, pulled his rifle from the bag, reassembled it in seconds, and locked the bolt. This wasn't a battlefield. It was a net, and he was tangled in the middle of it. The rooftop gave Maddox a brief advantage, elevation, distance, a moment to breathe, but it was fading fast. The city around him had shifted from terrain to weapon. Every building he once used for cover was now part of the enemy's grid. They weren't searching randomly. They were closing in methodically, building by building, rooftop to rooftop, floor by floor. It was a net, and he was already in the center. The shot had given him away, but his silence since then had been used to triangulate his route. His evasion patterns were being fed into the trap as fast as he made them. This wasn't a search party. This was a coordinated kill zone. From the rooftop, he spotted 2 figures moving along the far eastern wall of a bombed-out market. One held a radio, the other a suppressed rifle. They were scanning rooftops with thermal monoculars. He ducked, his body pressed flat to the stone. He had only minutes before they reached his building. He couldn't run, not without being seen. The sun was now high enough to strip away shadows, and the rooftop was exposed. He needed to move downward, fast. He descended the inner staircase 2 floors, boots silent, shoulders brushing stone, every sound magnified by adrenaline. He paused on the 2nd floor, scanning for alternate exits. The hallway was collapsed. Wood, brick, glass. And beyond that, a gaping hole led to the alley below. He judged the distance. 4 meters. He jumped, landed hard, rolled, ignored the pain that shot through his hip. Now in the alley, he sprinted west, hugging the wall, ducking beneath hanging sheets of twisted rebar and fractured balconies. His breath was steady, measured, combat breathing, trained and conditioned. His weapon was slung tight, his sidearm in his hand. There was no time to plan, only time to move. He crossed the next 2 blocks under cover of dust kicked up by earlier shelling. It masked his path, but only barely. He reached an old bakery, its walls half gone, and slipped through a doorway missing its frame. Inside, the air was hot, thick with ash. Empty shelves, overturned chairs, broken tile floors. He crouched behind a crumbled display case, heart hammering in his throat. A voice. Outside. Calm, confident, not shouting. Then another. Steps. 5, maybe 6 men. Maddox closed his eyes, counted the footsteps, 1 to the left, 2 in the alley, 3 entering the building. He moved quickly, crawling to the rear, finding the cold storage unit. A walk-in freezer with the door blown off. He slid inside, held his breath. The footsteps passed, then stopped. A flashlight beam cut across the floor. Dust particles danced like embers. He didn't move. For nearly 10 minutes, they searched. Someone kicked open the freezer door. It creaked, barely shifting. A pause, then a retreat. He waited 10 minutes longer before moving. Now he was boxed in. The patrols were increasing. They weren't making noise anymore, just signals, short whistles, clicks, gestures. They moved with military precision. Maddox knew what that meant. These weren't just insurgents. This was a trained unit. Contractors maybe. Foreign fighters with support. He needed exfil, but he had no signal. He climbed to the top floor of the bakery, pulled out his secondary radio from his pack, and attached the long-range antenna. It was bent, cracked at the base. He adjusted it, powered the unit, cycled through emergency frequencies. A brief pulse of static, then nothing. He tried again. Switched to an older channel used only in emergencies. A faint signal returned, encrypted but present. He keyed a short code. Echo 59, lone operator, code black. No reply. He repeated it. Then the signal vanished. Jammed again. He cursed silently, then slung his rifle and began climbing through a window onto an adjacent roof. He needed distance, altitude. Somewhere he could see past the kill box and into the open. If he could get to the river, there might be a comms drone overhead. But as he rose over the next roof, he saw it. The skyline was full of new shadows, fighters on rooftops, posted in pairs, watching alleyways. They were closing the city street by street. He dropped back down. Blood now ran down his left arm where a shard of rusted metal had split the skin open earlier. He pressed gauze to it, wrapped it with duct tape from his pouch, and pushed forward. He ducked into a mechanic's garage. The space was large, echoing with silence. A rusted car frame, scorched tires, melted tools. He moved toward the far wall, then froze. Footprints, fresh. He stepped back, rifle raised. A man appeared from behind the car, hooded, armed, bearded. They locked eyes. Maddox fired. 1 shot. The man collapsed. The body hit the ground with a sickening thud. Then came the whistle. 2 more entered the garage, rifles raised. Maddox dove behind the frame, returned fire, short bursts. 1 went down. The other took cover. Smoke, sparks, shouts outside. No more time. He burst through the side exit, sprinting down a rubble path, heart slamming, blood in his mouth. He had to disappear, had to break the pattern, had to become unpredictable. Because now, they weren't just chasing him. They were surrounding him. And the net had tightened. The streets narrowed as Maddox pushed deeper into the heart of the abandoned industrial district. A stretch of crumbling workshops and defunct warehouses that had once processed grain and scrap metal before the war turned everything into charred. Ruins and ambush zones. He was breathing hard now, more from the mental weight than the physical exertion. Every step, every decision carried consequence. There were no margins for error. The pattern had to break. He had to become the variable they couldn't account for. Unpredictable, irrational, invisible. Because this wasn't just an escape anymore. It was a game of endurance, a test of who could outlast whom in the dead space between breathing and bleeding out. He slipped into a collapsed structure that had once been a parts foundry, the roof torn away, steel beams exposed like ribs against the dust-streaked sky. The interior smelled of rust and engine oil, mingled with the copper scent of dried blood from a firefight long past. Maddox moved in silence, eyes scanning for tripwires, thermal traps, any sign that this space too had been claimed. But it was clear. Forgotten. Just empty enough to buy him time. He dropped to one knee behind a forklift, unzipped the lower pouch of his rig, and removed the last protein ration. Dry, tasteless, but packed with electrolytes and slow-burn carbs. He chewed in silence, sipping from his half-empty canteen. His hands trembled, not from weakness, but from the adrenaline that hadn't stopped coursing through his system since he pulled the trigger. His fingers twitched against his thigh in a familiar rhythm, a counting method, 12 beats per cycle, designed to keep his focus during sniper Overwatch. But this wasn't Overwatch. This was something else entirely. He needed a new route. The original exfil zone was gone. The secondary fallback, abandoned. The backup radio hadn't worked. That meant there was one last option. The old NATO dump site south of the city, buried beneath an overpass and partially flooded. Not an extraction point, but a safe zone where friendly assets had once stashed gear and medkits during the surge years. It was a gamble. The site might be looted. It might be occupied. Or worse, known. But it was all he had. He began moving again, crossing the building and exiting into a narrow trench of rubble flanked by the black skeletons of streetlights and the faint charred smell of burned-out vehicles. The sky had shifted again. Late afternoon light bending low, throwing long shadows that warped perspective. Maddox used them, moving like smoke through ruins, choosing broken lines, crouching low, never taking the same path twice. He headed south by instinct toward the edge of the grid, and that's when he saw it. Two men, not in uniform, not sweeping, waiting. They stood beside a downed utility truck, weapons low, hands loose, too relaxed for insurgents, too focused to be civilians. Maddox studied their posture, the position of their feet, the subtle shift of their heads as they scanned the horizon. Contractors, foreign, likely support for whoever was running the op. They were guarding something. He crept closer, circling through the side ruins. From a better angle, he saw it. A satellite uplink dish, old, jury-rigged into a backpack comms array. Someone had been bouncing signals, not just blocking his frequency, monitoring his transmissions. The trap had been wider than he thought. And then he saw the cage. It wasn't a cage in the traditional sense. More like a checkpoint converted into a human holding pen. Barbed wire fencing, makeshift shackles, a lean-to tent with two figures sitting inside. One of them looked up. It was his spotter. Stripped of gear, face bruised, wrists zip-tied to a post. He was alive. Maddox froze. Rage surged, followed by clarity. This was the pivot. This was the moment the mission changed. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He had a new objective. He mapped the terrain in his mind. Distance, 75 meters. Cover, scattered wrecks, a low wall, and a burned-out bus. He checked his rounds. 4 in the rifle, 1 in the SIG, and a boot knife. Not enough for a prolonged engagement, but enough for disruption. Enough to crack their formation and create an opening. He moved quickly, crawled under the bus, rigged a distraction with a smoke canister and a reflective shard of mirror. When the smoke popped, it would bounce the light, creating a false silhouette. It would only work once, maybe 5 seconds. That was all he needed. He crawled into position, lined up the shot, adjusted for crosswind, and pulled the trigger. First guard dropped. Second turned, hesitated, then fired. Maddox rolled, avoided the burst, fired again, missed, returned fire, hit. He sprinted low, grabbed the second guard's rifle, cut the zip ties with his knife, and hauled his spotter upright. No words exchanged, just motion. The other captive was dead. The site had no backup, but they had a signal booster now. He rigged the array to shortwave emergency burst, keyed in the NATO distress code, and activated it. Then they ran. Not away from the city, but toward the river. Because if the signal reached high enough, someone would hear it. And for the first time since the shot, Maddox felt the tide shift. Not in safety, but in purpose. They didn't run through the city. They fought their way through it. The difference was measured in intent, in the decisions made when your legs scream for rest, but your finger stays on the trigger. Maddox and his spotter, callsign Glass, didn't speak. There was no time. Just eye contact, nods, and instinct. Their bodies moved with the kind of coordination that only came from months of shared missions, muscle memory, and silent understanding forged through fire. Together, they slipped from ruin to ruin, building to building, avoiding the open roads, cutting through the ribs of Fallujah's industrial sprawl like blood through cracked arteries. But the city wasn't letting them go. The ambush hadn't failed. It had simply shifted tactics. Now it was mobile. Roving fire teams moved in sweeping L patterns, trying to funnel them toward kill zones. Drones buzzed overhead, low and slow, their signal drones, not armed, but tracking infrared, heat, motion. The signal Maddox had sent from the comms array had gone out. He was sure of it. But rescue wouldn't be immediate. That signal would have to bounce, be received, decoded, verified. He figured best case response time, 30 minutes. Worst case, they were on their own until morning. They had to hold. They took cover in a butchered textile factory near the riverbank, its ceiling half collapsed, rolls of synthetic fiber scattered like ghost intestines across the floor. Maddox reloaded what little he had. 2 fresh mags for the captured AK, 1 grenade he'd scavenged off a dead patrolman, and the rifle still slung tight to his chest. Every round inside now a decision that could shift the line between life and death. Outside, voices echoed. Flashlights swept across windows. Not random. They were zeroing in. He pulled Glass behind a rusted loom and waited. Time slipped again, counted not in minutes but in steps approaching too close and breaths held too long. Then came the breach. 3 figures storming the lower level, boots pounding. Maddox threw the grenade without hesitation. It bounced once. Then light and thunder cracked the silence into flame. Screams. Smoke. He moved first, Glass behind him. They shot their way out through the northern wall, ducking through a blown-out ventilation shaft that led to a service road. The air stank of sulfur, blood, and fear. Maddox knew they'd only bought themselves a minute, maybe 2, but it was enough. They pushed toward the bridge, the last physical threshold between the inner city and the old NATO dump site, where Maddox hoped something, anything, had survived the years of abandonment. The bridge had once supported military traffic. Now it sagged in the middle, its beams warped, its frame littered with the husks of old vehicles and civilian remains. But it was open. Too open. He stopped before crossing, scanning both ends. Tripwires, snipers, a claymore, partially buried behind a traffic barrier. He pointed. Glass nodded. They cleared the path, inch by inch, disarming what they could, marking the rest. They crossed in a crouch, fire flaring behind them as their pursuers realized the direction they'd taken. Rounds clanged off rusted metal. Maddox returned fire, short, sharp bursts, to suppress, not to kill. Their goal now was time. As they reached the far side, the world split open again, this time from above. A single Apache broke over the skyline, low and angry, its rotor wash scattering dust and paper across the road like a storm. Maddox recognized the profile. Gunship. Not local. Not mercenary. U.S. Army. The signal had worked. They waved, IR strobe flashing on Maddox's chest in rapid bursts. The bird rotated in place, 30mm cannon spinning, scanning the road below. Then, it loosed hell. A burst of fire traced along the road, carving through buildings and sandbag emplacements like paper. Fighters scattered. Some ran. Others vanished in explosions of smoke and debris. Maddox and Glass dove behind a flipped truck as the Apache circled again, cleaning the southern approach with the precision only air superiority could provide. A second bird followed. This one slower, heavier. Black Hawk. Extraction. It dropped fast, side door open, crew firing over the edge to keep the road clear. Maddox felt the wind whip his face, dust biting into every cut, every open wound, but he didn't stop moving. He grabbed Glass's vest, pulled him to his feet, and they sprinted together. 20 meters. Bullets ricocheted. 10. Glass stumbled, caught himself. 5. Then arms pulled them in. They were inside. Door slammed. Engines roared, and they lifted. Below them, the city shrank, still burning. Inside the cabin, the crew checked them, patted them down, shouted questions neither Maddox nor Glass answered. They just leaned back, heads touching the cold steel, blood drying on their faces. Maddox stared at the floor. It was over, but the weight hadn't lifted. Because he knew this wasn't victory. This was survival. Paid for in blood, forged in steel. The world didn't feel real once they were in the air. The vibrations of the Black Hawk beneath them, the muted roar of the rotors above, and the pulsing hum of the medics' radios were all too soft, too distant to seem connected to the hell they had just emerged from. Maddox sat slumped against the cabin wall, legs sprawled, blood caked on his face and neck, eyes wide open but not focused. His rifle rested across his lap like an artifact, still clutched with the kind of grip that came from instinct, not thought. Glass lay beside him, semi-conscious, head swaying gently with each lurch of the helicopter. His mouth moved, forming words that never came out, too weak to speak, too strong to sleep. No one said much on the ride back. The crew didn't ask questions. They didn't need to. They'd seen that look before. The 1,000-yard stare, the silent nod, the breathing that stays shallow long after the danger is gone. Maddox felt it all. The heat of the city still in his bones, the dust in his lungs, the pressure in his ears that no altitude could shake. And beneath it all, that familiar, crushing weight. Not grief, not pride, something heavier, something quieter. They landed at a forward operating base 90 miles from the city. The sky was shifting into morning. Gold light broke across the airstrip, casting long shadows behind the chopper. Medics rushed the ramp as the door opened, but Maddox waved them off. He could walk. He did walk. Slow, limping, but under his own power. Glass was taken on a stretcher. Maddox followed behind until they reached the intake tents. Then he sat and waited. They gave him a bed, an IV, and a clipboard. Standard procedure. Debrief to come. Intelligence review. Psychological evaluation. He filled out what he could, left the rest blank. He didn't care about the mission code. He didn't care about who sent the false signal or how the bait had been set. Those were answers for desks and analysts, for reports that would be buried beneath language like operational miscommunication or isolated engagement. He knew better. What happened out there wasn't a mistake. It was evolution. War becoming smarter, deadlier. The enemy wasn't hiding in shadows anymore. They were building traps in plain sight, setting puzzles not for generals but for men like him, men trained to trust instinct and precision. That trust had been used against him, and he'd survived only because he stopped thinking like a soldier and started moving like prey. They let him shower. The water ran brown, then pink, then clear. He stood beneath it for almost 20 minutes, staring at the wall. When he looked down, his hands were shaking. He pressed them to his thighs, willing them to stop. They didn't. The official debrief came 2 days later. 2 officers, 1 intel rep, 1 translator. Questions about the target, the shot, the retreat. He gave them details, concise, surgical, emotionless. They asked about the rooftop glints, the triangulated movement, the jamming. He answered. But when they asked how he had escaped, how he'd turned the trap back on them, he paused. He didn't know what to say, because the truth wasn't tactical. The truth was that something inside him broke after the shot, and in that break, he found clarity. Not the kind taught in training, but something deeper, animal, pure. The knowledge that no one was coming to save him. That every move had to be his own. That survival was not a strategy, but a state of mind. He signed the statement, stood up, left. They offered him 2 weeks of decompression in Germany. He declined. He flew home under civilian cover, landing in Virginia on a wet Tuesday morning with no fanfare. A government vehicle dropped him at a quiet apartment complex just outside Arlington. The driver said nothing. Neither did Maddox. He spent the first night on the floor, still in his boots, staring at the ceiling. The second night, he didn't sleep at all. He kept hearing the echo, the moment after the shot when the world held its breath and never exhaled. Weeks passed. No phone calls, no follow-ups, no medals. The operation was classified. The kill, never confirmed. The enemy forces, unverified. It was labeled a ghost mission, one that officially never happened. But Maddox remembered. Every rooftop, every alley, every body. He stopped going out during the day, only walked at night when the air was still and no reflections danced on the glass. He trained in silence, ate when he remembered, drank only black coffee. He built a small range in the woods behind the property. Not for practice, for presence. Every few days, he'd line up 7 stones across the far hill and take a single shot. Then, another. Until all were down. And when he returned inside, he didn't feel better. Just quieter. Because silence was all that remained. Not peace, not justice. Just silence. The kind that comes after the gunfire ends. The kind that follows a shot that was never meant to kill, only to awaken something that never sleeps again.